Good morning. Welcome at the Thursday seminar of CTS. We apologize for the delay due to technical issues in the presentation. And it's my pleasure to introduce Felipe Cerezer. Most of you already met him here in CTS. He started to work here in, what was it? Basically 1 year ago. Felipe is from Brazil, and we met at several occasions in different places in the world before he came, and it turned out that he was interested in very similar stuff what I am interested in, but he was more focused on like some trade things, like for example evolution of colors in animals and such stuff. But now he is employed within my project devoted to biodiversity dynamics, and basically this will be also the topic of his talk. So please, Felipe.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you, David, for the introduction, and sorry for the technical issues. Sometimes technology betrays us. But then I would like to, actually, I won't begin my talk saying once upon a time, like in a fairy tale, but instead, I would like you to imagine that you are walking through just a half square kilometer in the Amazon rainforest. Particularly in this small area, you can encounter as many plant species as are found across the entire 4 million square kilometers in the temperate forests. Similarly, Ecuador, a country roughly the size of Colorado in the United States, hosts over 700 species of ants, which nearly matches the total number of ant species found across the entire United States. So basically, I could keep giving you many more examples like these, but the main idea that I want to showcase here is how species diversity varies from one place to another. And this further raises another questions. So what drives such incredible variation in biodiversity across the globe? And this is the topic I will be presenting to you today. But before doing that, before diving into this topic, I would like to give you some quick background about myself. David already mentioned, I'm from Brazil, more specifically from the southernmost part of Brazil, near the border of Uruguay and Argentina. So basically, I grew up in a small city which has a strong Italian heritage. So there were some Italian immigrants that came to this region in the 19th century. And this city is surrounded by beautiful forests, beautiful waterfalls. More specifically, my city is placed within the Atlantic Forest biome, which stretches along the eastern coast of Brazil. And as you can see in the yellow part, highlighted in yellow, that's the original Atlantic Forest domain or vegetation. And in green, we can see the remaining parts of the Atlantic Forest. And as you can see, only about 10% of the original extent, the original vegetation still remains. And just to give you some context, this biome covers only 15% of the Brazilian territory, but it's home to over 70% of the Brazilian population. So most of the Brazilian population is within this area.
You mean human population?
Human population,
no,
yeah.
No,
But it's still life, right? So, so this unfortunately explains why this biome has suffered a lot with deforestation. So basically, despite all of these human threats, the Atlantic Forest is considered one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. Actually, is considered a hotspot of biodiversity, a hotspot because due to the exceptional number of species, and also due to the high number of endemic species, or species which are not which are found nowhere else in the world. So basically, just bringing this biodiversity into numbers, we can find in this biome around 20,000 plant species, over 1,000 species of birds, and just to make some comparison, here in Czech Republic, we can find around 400 species all over the year. Other numbers, another number which stands out is the high level of endemic species of amphibians. So there are over 250 species which are found only in that particular area. And besides that, we still found a lot of mammals and reptile species. Okay, so basically being born and raised surrounded by this environment definitely influenced my passion about nature, which further led me to pursue my bachelor studies in biology at the Federal University of Santa Maria, just a few kilometers from my hometown, actually just behind one of these mountains my city is placed. So basically at this same university, I also completed my PhD in, my master and PhD studies. And when I transitioned from my master to my PhD, I started to work with biodiversity patterns in a broad sense, but mainly trying to understand the main drivers behind this pattern. And David also mentioned this, but last year then I completed my PhD, and then I moved to Prague to start my postdoc. So basically this brings me to the research that I've been doing at CTS, which relates to large-scale patterns in species diversity. And now going specifically to this topic, I will start by showing you some historical background about this topic, and then I will highlight the main explanations that are proposed to explain these patterns, and then I will connect with an expanded framework that we are proposing to explain these large-scale patterns in species diversity. So it's worth mentioning that actually my work is just one of many being developed within the ETBD theory, or the equilibrium theory of biodiversity dynamics, which is led by David in his Expro Gotcher grant. Okay, so at this point of the presentation, I've shown you some comparisons. I also described a little bit about the biodiversity in my region. So you may agree with me that life on Earth has some heterogeneous distribution. Actually, tropical regions, particularly within the rainforests, they have an exuberant biodiversity. And in contrast, cold and temperate regions have a much less biodiversity when compared to tropical environments. So this increase in species diversity towards the tropics is known as latitudinal diversity gradient. Actually, this latitudinal gradient is considered one of the oldest and most debated topics in ecology. Even some people consider as a universal rule, because for most of clades, plants, and animals, they tend to show this pattern of increasing the diversity when we get close to the equator.
Which taxa is this?
Here is for, I don't remember exactly, but it's for mammals, some particular group within mammals.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the Himalayas have quite low diversity.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, within these beings, we usually found, so that's what I want to showcase here.
But I don't think it's nice.
Yeah, I don't recall.
Not all mammals.
No, it's a particular group within some group mammals or birds, whatever. But what I want to highlight here is that there's a latitudinal gradient in species diversity. So what makes the tropics a hotspot for so many species? So basically, attempts to explain these, to answer these questions, date back to the early explorers and early naturalists who embarked on expeditions into the tropics and were the first to be mesmerized, to be fascinated by such diversity. For example, Alexander von Humboldt, one of the most famous naturalists, after returning from one expedition in South America in the early 19th century, he wrote like that: the nearer we approach the tropics, the greater the increase in the variety of structure, grace of form, and mixture of colors, as also in perpetual youth and vigor of organic life. A few decades later, also in the 19th century, Wallace, another naturalist who needs no introduction, wrote that animal life is, on the whole, far more abundant and more varied within the tropics than in any part of the globe, and a great number of peculiar groups are found there which never extend into temperate regions. So basically, after the discovery of this latitudinal diversity gradient over 2 centuries ago, the number of proposed explanations to this phenomena have increased rapidly over time. Here I'm bringing a classic paper published in the early 2000s, where they cite actually over 30 explanations to account for the latitudinal diversity gradient. So I won't go deep into this actually, but I just want to show that this pattern, which seems simple in terms of many clades tend to follow this pattern, but when it comes to explanations, there's a plenty of explanations, and actually they consider these explanations as a mixed bag because some of these explanations are too simple, and here I mean that they are narrow and too specific to explain such a large scale and widespread pattern. Some of these explanations, let's say harshness, predation, they are considered circular in the sense that they alone in isolation cannot generate such large scale pattern.
Or they are circular because basically they would not work without biodiversity like pre-existing biodiversity patterns. Why there should be a higher predation of the tropics? They should say it's because there's more species, but yeah, that's what we want to explain, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also some of these explanations lack support, they are insufficiently supported. So based on these, in the recent years, some studies have categorized this array of explanations into 3 higher level explanations, including diversification rates, time for species accumulation, and ecological limits. Now I will briefly explain each one of these explanations. So basically, diversification rates hypothesis. So basically, this hypothesis suggests that some areas could act as a cradle in a museum. A cradle because more species can appear and originate over time, but also some areas could preserve more species over the time. So in this sense, tropical regions could have some intrinsic characteristics such as a higher temperature, more resources, in which could promote the appearance, the origination of more species over time, while also these regions have been more stable, climatically stable over time, and this could preserve more species in that areas. It also implies that, for example, temperate regions could act as a graveyard, and then more species become extinct to death. So
these are two different hypotheses, right?
No, but it's relating to the balance between speciation and extinction. That's why I try to make this comparison between cradle and museum, because so there's higher speciation, more species appearing, but lower extinction. So that what I try to make it more maybe easy to digest.
Can I ask? So in the citation by Wallace, he said that there are two facts. So one is abundance, and the other is variety. So what is the relationship between these two? Because some of the factors, they affect abundance and variety at the same time. And is there a place where you have like a lot of variance with like low abundance, or do these two things go together?
Yeah, no, perfect question, comment. Actually, I'm gonna show you another hypothesis which kind of links with these, but the idea is that, let's say, abundance or any other climate conditions could affect lately these rates of speciation and extinction. So this alone cannot explain. There's something else that could go through these rates, or I mean speciation or extinction, and therefore explain the biodiversity patterns in a given area.
But that was not the question, right? That's what
But that was no question. The question was like, so some factors, the fact that you have like many individuals, no matter how many species you have, right? And intuitive, I think that's the precondition for having like many species. You need to have like many
more abundance, and then but I guess it goes in this direction that higher abundance relates to reduced extinction levels, and then it's more or less connected.
If you ask about what the patterns what are the patterns we observed, typically patterns in abundances are much less clear generally. They are messy. Yeah, so you cannot be like with certainty say that there are like higher abundances of almost anything in the tropics.
It was in this regard. Okay, so maybe I missed.
Because Wallace mentioned abundances, right? But in fact, it's not clear, you know, how abundances vary, and if they vary, they do not vary as much as number of species. That's what we observe typically.
Okay. Now, now the time for species accumulation hypothesis. So basically, these hypotheses suggest a difference in species diversity between regions reflects the time length since the region was first colonized. So, for example, this region number 1 have more species, and this region 4 have a lower species. So this difference could be explained simply because the region 1 is much older. So this region had more time to accumulate species over the time.
But why don't you like link these things to this museum hypothesis? For me, this is the museum hypothesis, no? But like the museum, this first region is a museum because it is old and
but then I guess that's why I will argue that these 3 broad explanations, they can often overlap, because if you go to the traditional description of this, is like the balance between speciation and extinction, but then it's of course it's also linked with these, and then I'm going to show you later that these explanations, they very often overlap, and then there might be some misleading things behind of this. So basically, I'm just describing how these hypotheses are defined. So finally, these ecological limits hypothesis, it suggests that species reach regions such as the tropics. They have more resources, which could allow larger populations or support the coexistence of more species. So basically, it's like having a large pizza. The more slice we cut this pizza, the more people can get a piece. So the idea here is the tropics, they have more slice, and then that could be partitioned or divide among a higher number of species. So basically, okay, while these 3 broad categories, they can be very useful to explain species reaching patterns, we have to acknowledge that there are some could be some misleading problems behind this, particularly because these three explanations are not mutually exclusive. They quite very often overlap. Even David mentioned that, okay, both hypotheses could be like related somehow. And they also can blur some important mechanisms behind species richness patterns. So basically, based on these issues, we are proposing an expanded, a more dynamic framework, which goes beyond these three traditional explanations. And basically, this classification, this framework is based on two major criteria: time and speciation rates. And by speciation rate, I mean how quickly new species form over time. So that's the one of, there are so many definitions for speciation rate, but here is how fastly new species appear. So basically, these two major criteria depend on whether they are important or unimportant. This could predict or distinguish four distinct scenarios, and I'm gonna go through each one of these scenarios.
So this is the first two hypotheses, right?
No, that's why we are trying to argue that it's not like taking only the first two hypotheses, but we can take like the ideas behind of those hypotheses and then develop it more in terms of the mechanisms behind of the.
Basically, to classify all the hypotheses based on these two dichotomies, whether speciation rate plays a role or not, and whether time for species accumulation plays a role or not. It's like, you know, an exclusive kind of classification, which we think would lead to better kind of formulation of how to kind of discriminate the explanations.
Yeah, but basically those two axes correspond to the first two hypotheses, right?
Somehow, yes, but yeah, but we are still like going beyond these to like divide things and actually I'm gonna show that it's much more complex than those three categories. But okay, so the first scenario, which is we call as stable persistence. So basically here, both time and speciation are not important, and difference in species richness is determined by environmental productivity and its effects on species coexistence. But basically, I know it's quite tricky maybe to digest these. So please interrupt me and we can discuss and provide more clarification. But what you have to bear in mind here is that you have to think about this framework as a dynamic system. A dynamic system because the rates of speciation and extinction, they matter. And also, it also defines whether the system is in equilibrium or not. So coming back to this first scenario, in blue we have speciation rates, in red we have extinction. So as you can see, in this particular scenario, speciation rates do not vary across regions, but you have difference in extinction curves that could be explained by environmental conditions. So this is the idea behind of this first scenario. The next one we call as speciation balance, and here the idea is that regions differ in speciation rates. So basically, this difference in speciation rates determine the equilibrium level of species richness. And then, as you can see, this first row, there's no time is not important. So for these first two scenarios, we would classify them as equilibrium dynamics. Whereas when time is important, the second row, the last two scenarios, we have non-equilibrium explanations. So the next scenario we call as historical legacy. So here, speciation rate is not important. There's minimal variation in speciation rates, and time plays a major role to explain species richness. So the idea is that older regions can simply have more species because they are older, so they had more time to accumulate species than younger regions. Last but not least, the scenario we call as diversity cradles. So here, basically, both time and speciation are important, and the number of species in a given area is influenced for speciation. In this case, there's like higher speciation rates, but also time could be important in terms of provide enough time frame to species accumulate over time.
Can you say a little bit more about the units? Because it seems that in the diagrams above there is a different maybe time scale than, so this could like both be true, but on a different time scale. So is it like per, what's the species? Is it like per, yeah, is it like per unit of time or?
Yes, I mean, that's a bit tricky because actually the ways we can measure these currently, they are not so sophisticated, I would say, because we use phylogenies, and that this might not provide a big picture of everything. But here what we are saying here is that basically the longer the region was first colonized, the more time it had to accumulate species over time. So it's basically a matter of how long some specific region has been colonized. So if I have a very young region, this region could not have enough species yet because it didn't have the proper time to...
I understand, but I'm trying to understand the diagram. So species richness, is it like a snapshot, like in given time?
No. I think you should have really explained what is on the graphs, because these are not graphs of like historically development of it, but it's really like phase, like state space basically diagram, right? So species richness is a state variable which affect the rates. So it's not about like the time doesn't go to the right. Yeah, and you did not say at all why the extinction curves are like this, because they could have different shape and then it would not be,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
it's really...
here I just try to make it more broad, because when I'm going to show the results that we found, then I would like develop more based on the...
Yeah, but still, it's apparently not clear what is there, right? Because it's like how the species richness affect the rates according to these diagrams.
You mean how species by itself could move these lines? Yeah.
No move, but you have line, you have the increasing line, and why it is increasing?
I don't know if I got your question, but let's say in this scenario here, we could have higher species. We could have like temperate region and tropical region, and here we have an environment with more resource, so this could support more higher population, and this would lead to less steep extinction curves. So, but I'm not sure if I got your...
But why the extinction curves are increasing at all?
But actually,
without saying this, it does not make sense, right? You must assume that extinction rate increases with species richness.
Yes, but also it depends the environmental conditions of
Sure. But that's the other step, which kind of...
Like here it seems the extinction rate is something like a parameter like alpha times like species richness, but speciation seems like constant.
Yes.
So...
And actually, it's even more complex, because in practice we are not quantifying extinction due to some
No, but just if you speak about the concept, you need to say what is there on the axis, right?
I mean, like I'm not a biologist, but I'm confused about the intuition, like why, like I don't know, like as someone who doesn't understand it at all, I would be like, I would expect like speciation also kind of depend on the number of species, because then
Yes.
there's like more species which can split, and like extinction also possibly if you have more species, there's like larger probability that like larger
Yeah,
number of,
Yeah,
but like one of the curves is kind of like is constant, like the speciation, the blue line is constant, but the other one seems to be linear dependent on the number of species.
yeah, because if you have a lot higher species richness, you would have lower populations divide between these species, and then the extinction would increase in this case.
Yeah, but that's the point, you know, it is per lineage speciation rate.
Yeah.
And then it is,
It's per language. Yeah, okay.
it's per lineage.
Yeah, that it makes sense.
Yeah, that's the important point. But then you would need to explain why the per lineage extinction rate increases with species richness.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so I missed this, maybe this.
I mean, like either both things are linear or
not, yeah.
or not, or there is something, there is some other idea which is unclear.
And there is, and you mentioned it, there is this idea that higher species richness for given environment necessarily means smaller populations and increasing extinction rate. So without this assumption, it would not work at all.
So in this context, you're mentioned that I should have introduced before. Okay.
No, that's the crucial kind of point of all the context, that high species richness means that the species must have smaller populations, right? And
that it increases the probability of extinction.
Yeah. That's the major point, which is but the point is that for the other bottom scenarios, basically this still holds, but it is not that relevant because we are far away from the extinction curve.
Okay.
Can I ask, so extinction rate, is it like per unit of time? Is it like per year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question was, is it the same unit in the above diagram as in the top and in the bottom? Because if
but it's
the same unit.
It's per unit of time, but also per lineage.
Per lineage.
It's not absolute number. It's
per lineage. Yes, exactly.
And so is extinction, right?
Yeah.
Both. Yeah.
Everything is normalized too.
Yeah, exactly.
But then anticipating a bit, you see that in the results we are actually quantifying speciation rates, because it's been shown it's more accurate, because we are using phylogenies with extant species, and then the current methods we have, they could not realistically estimate extinction or those species which were lost along the way. And then we use extinction here just in a matter of theoretical interpretation, but the results that I'm gonna show, we did not calculate.
Yes, but on the other hand, the extinction rate is really the most important component of the whole stuff, because otherwise, without increasing extinction rate with species richness, you would not have any equilibria. So even you would not even think about equilibria at all, right? Regardless of whether like real situation is close or far away from the equilibria, right? So that's important to point out, that the whole framework assumes that the equilibria exist. The difference is only whether we are so far from the equilibria that basically it is not that important where they are.
Yes.
In the speciation bound scenario, why the extinction rate does not vary? It does in the stable persistence.
Because here I would say that speciation is important, and these difference in speciations are responsible to determine where the equilibria would be placed.
I understand, but I just thought whether even in this scenario, the extinction rate, why it should not vary.
It could.
It could, but the idea here is that speciation rate varies, and then I guess extinction here doesn't matter that much in terms, because it's dominated mostly by speciation rates in this context.
It is really about what dominates, because you can vary everything and you can basically combine it. It does not say that like, you know, the scenarios are not completely exclusive either, also as in the previous case,
Exactly.
right? But still, we are interested whether really the major differences are dominated by differing like speciation rate or something else. Yeah, so that's
okay. So basically, so far I have discussed the speciation and extinction importance or unimportance, but then the importance of environmental variables could also differ based on the specific scenario. So for example, when speciation and time are not important, we kind of predict that environmental variables mainly related to productivity should show direct, strong and direct effects on species richness. Basically, when speciation is important, no matter whether in equilibrium or non-equilibrium, we predict that first, speciation should be strongly and positively related to species richness, and also the indirect effects of climate via or through speciation should be strong. Okay. So, and finally, when time plays a role, we predict that the direct effects of environmental productivity, environmental variables, but mainly productivity, should be weak. So, with basically with this framework, basically the goal here, we aim to test how these different scenarios explain species richness patterns across tetrapods or amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. In addition, we also test if whether the importance of these scenarios could vary based on some clade characteristics such as physiology and how was the climate conditions when the clade appeared. So basically, according to the metabolic theory of ecology, the importance of temperature and productivity on species richness pattern could be different. It's expected to be different. For example, for ectotherms, whose metabolism, body temperatures strongly depend on the external environment, we would expect that this pathway here, where temperature could affect the metabolism, increase mutation rates, and therefore speciation rates. In contrast, for endotherms, which have the capacity to regulate their metabolism, body temperature, is predicted according to this theory that productivity via resource abundance, number of individuals should show stronger effects. Okay, we also know that the climate has substantially varied throughout Earth's history, and this somehow could impact the dynamic of these clades. So, for example, we know that there were some periods where the Earth was warmer, mainly Cretaceous to early Eocene. So there was a warming period, and this could have could have created a more flat latitudinal diversity gradient. And after the post-Eocene period, there was a cooling down moment, and this is predicted to have caused a more steep latitudinal diversity gradient.
you should say time goes down.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Time goes like this.
No, which is not.
Yeah, it's counting.
Geologistic typically.
Yes. Right. But it was the best figure. I found everything there. And also there's been some suggestions in the literature that that groups that appeared in warm periods, they should show positive effects of temperature and species richness, whereas for clades which appeared in cold periods, we could either found non-existent or negative effects. So based on these characteristics, we also compared if the importance of those four scenarios vary accordingly. Okay, next slides now, I'm gonna show how we approach this. So basically the first step, we obtain phylogenies or depicting the phylogenetic relationship between species among tetrapods. And the first challenge we faced was to define the best criteria to select these clades. If we go through the literature, we can find at least three main ways of doing that. So the first one is that we can select clades based on taxonomic ranks, let's say select by order, genus, family. But this could be challenging because what's the best resolution or the best taxonomic level to select for the study you are interested in?
But I don't think this is the problem. The problem is that these ranks are arbitrary. No?
Yeah, they're arbitrary, but then also, shall I go like, should I pick up genus or order, and how it could somehow...
Well, but that would not be a problem, right? You would say, okay, let's take orders because they are big enough to explore these patterns. But the problem is that the orders do not have the same meaning among different clades, I would say, right? So I don't think that the problem is that we could not like decide whether we take orders or families. We cannot take genuses because they are too small. Maybe family 2 order is just okay, you know. So we would
it's more the sense of
but the problem is that these taxonomic categories are really very like subjective, you know. They do not they are based simply on how taxonomists behaved, and they do not have real kind of justification in terms of, you know, what are these orders, and, you know, based on the trees. Yeah, that's I think that's the major problem with taking these categories, right?
Okay, yeah.
Which was kind of criticized that, you know, what are the orders.
Okay, other studies, they have used this slicing criteria. So they basically cut the tree in different pieces and then evaluate things within the cut periods, or they sometimes randomly select nodes across the phylogeny, but both slicing and random samples can create what we call as like nested clades. So basically, let's see these two random nodes, let's say. We can see that the same species, they appear in both clades. So this could somehow be, could bring some issues. So basically, to avoid these potential issues, we use this novel approach called Laplacian spectrum. So this approach uses graph theory from mathematics to quantify how things are connected in a system, within a system. And the system here, I mean the phylogeny, including its nodes, branching patterns, and the pairwise relations between species. And what I like most in this approach is that we don't need any a priori criteria. We just take into account the phylogeny itself, and then we can use this approach to identify modalities or species or clades which share similar evolutionary histories. So
can you please explain what exactly is arbitrary? Is the whole tree arbitrary or not? Because this is what I do not understand. Like,
you mean from the previous one or this?
Yeah, like if the bias is still here or not, like.
No, because here, so we don't need like specific criteria which could be based on something that still there's some pros and cons. So here we take the phylogeny and we use this approach to identify which species share the most like similar traits along its history. So
there's nothing arbitrary.
No, so yeah, there could be some extra things that we can discuss later, but by using this, you don't need to either define like this arbitrary related to taxonomic ranks or use this slice or random that could result in nested clades. So here we have no nested clades. So
without any classification, it's just
numbers. It is more complicated.
It's more
right? Because Laplacian spectrum is basically the way you know what Laplace did. He took the graph, and you can represent each graph using a matrix of the links, right? And whenever you have matrix, you can calculate some things on matrices like eigenvectors, eigenvector values, and all these things. And based on this, you can make classifications.
Yes.
Of course, how many clusters you would have, it's still arbitrary, right? Like in any classification. But whenever you decide, okay, let's have this level of classification, you would have a non-arbitrary number of clusters.
Okay.
So there is some arbitrariness,
Yeah.
right? Because like in any classification, right? But the point is that really already Laplace, pointed out that any graph can be transformed to metrics, and whenever
You can interpret
and when you have metrics, you can basically do matrix operations and go ahead.
So basically, we took the phylogeny, and here is just an illustration that this approach could identify clades with shared similar history. So each different colors would represent different clades, but just an illustration. The next step, so for each of these selected clades, we assign its based on its physiology as either ectotherm or endotherm, and also we classify these clades as appearing in warm or cool periods to test based on the theories that I mentioned before. Sorry. So okay, let's say we took this first clade here. This clade here that has this geographic distribution in species richness. But if you are not familiar with this, I'm going to briefly explain how we come across with these maps. So basically, to calculate species richness patterns, first we have to take the range maps or the species distributions, and then we overlap these species distributions with a grid cell network. So by doing that, we can identify which species are in each grid cell, and then if we just sum up the number of species which are intersecting the grid cell, we can count these and generate these maps. So basically, I produce these, I calculate these maps for each of each clade that was selected. And the next step involved to test how different predictors influence these species richness patterns. And for that, we use time, speciation rates, temperature, precipitation, and productivity. I'm going to explain how I extract these predictors later on. But to test the importance of these predictors on species richness, we use path analysis, which some studies also call as structural equation model, but there's some difference between them. But we use these, so it's path analysis is a powerful tool when we have like a complex system with multiple variables. But the main reason here that we use this analysis is because we were interested in both direct and indirect effects. And by direct effects, as you can see in the yellow arrows, are simply those arrows heading directly to species richness. And in addition, we test two sets of indirect effects. One was mediated to species, SR is speciation rates, and another one is mediated to productivity. So the idea here of these indirect effects is that we can see how let's say taking temperature, how temperature can affect species richness via affecting speciation rates. So I don't know if I need to go much deeper into this, but let me know if you didn't grasp the idea. Because let's say for the indirect effects, we can just calculate how temperature influences species richness and how, speciation rates, and how speciation rates is related to species richness. And if we multiply the involved pathways, we have the indirect effect. But we also have how temperature influences species richness, not related to this pathway. So it's a very nice approach to address what we are trying to address in our study. Yeah, of course.
If we take only speciation rate, mutation rate, and extinction rate, is there any symbol dependence between them ecological without taking productivity in account?
You mean by speciation rate if I'm including more
I
things?
take David's idea that more speciation means lesser population,
Mhm.
therefore the populations are more prone to extinction.
Yes, no, it totally makes sense, but the idea here is there's maybe some challenges to estimate or to have like real estimations of these variables in such a large scale. But here I'm gonna explain the next slide how I calculate these predictor variables. But the idea is just an indication of how species are quickly appearing over time. And then you can have, of course, many implications behind these, like mutation rates and other explanations to explain this variation. But here's just how fast or slowly species appear over time.
But I think Honza is right that if we do not have extinction rate here, but in fact, if we really wanted to kind of link speciation rate, extinction rate, and species richness, I am afraid that it would not be possible using like structural equation models because there are these like multi-directional relationships.
You mean like
right?
if you want to test sorry, there's too many.
No. I mean,
What is that?
I mean these things, you know, because they are linked by like
like this.
No. If it is like dynamical system, when like species richness affects rates, right? I don't think it would be possible.
Like entangle using these path models.
Yeah. I think in this case it's okay because you basically test only speciation rate and environmental variables. But if we had like all these things, you know, you probably would not be able to use like path models.
You mean because there are loops?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the population which survives the extinction implied by the speciation, by increasing speciation, they are more fit to the environment, and yes, they have lower possibility to
well, this is
develop new features.
Yes, and then it becomes that's much more complex, and then I guess the path model maybe is not the best strategy for this. Yeah.
But this is the complexity which is basically impossible to encompass.
Take into account.
Yeah.
And wouldn't this work the best with the plants? Because
with what?
With plants, because plants are more directly related to the environment, and you don't have like, because if I think about mammals, then the herbivores depend on plants, carnivores depend on like herbivores and other carnivores, but plants are more directly related to the environment, and you know because if I look at the mammals, then richness generates even more richness, right? I think, but
I'm not sure if I got, but okay, yeah, I guess we can derive these predictions for many different clades. Of course, there's some like intrinsic biological characteristics like inherent of each clade, but I guess we can kind of broaden these predictions to many systems, including plants or animals. But I'm not sure if I answered.
Yeah, so my intuition is that for animals there's a lot of complexity because how many species of animals depends on like how many other animals there are. But it seems to me that plants are more directly connected to the like physical environment, and you don't have to like really worry about you know
the underlying text.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But actually, it seems to me that the experience is the opposite. And the reason is that here you can have productivity, which is basically something, you know, basically biomass production by plants, which is available as a resource for animals, right? So you have pretty clearly, even though it's not that easy, still productivity says quite a lot about resources for the animals.
Yeah.
But if you deal directly with plants, it's not that easy to say what is the resource for plants as such, right? Because plants themselves create the biomass out of air and light, right? And they need water, and they at the same time like strongly limit each other by like space limitations and so on. So it is not that easy.
But it's also not that easy because this is biomass available to animals, but we use only mammals, and some
Yes.
of them are herbivores, some of them are carnivores, so they use the biomass of herbivores.
It can be divided in many more like chains. Yes.
I would say it's easier.
Well, I think it is much easier because it's simply simply sufficient that some proportion of the biomass produced is available for mammals, and this proportion does not systematically varies with
You don't know.
productivity. Well, we know something about it.
But if you focus on herbivores, so here if
Yeah, you could for example limit it to
It
herbivores.
varies productivity because the efficiency of using biomass is not linear. It scales with the 3-4 quarters. So
You mean
efficiency of biomass
Like this scaling.
transfer level from lower trophic level to higher trophic level.
yeah, but it is simply sufficient that it does not vary with space in this case. No.
I don't know.
Of course, it varies with body size, but if body size does not.
No, but with productivity, like low productive environment, the transfer level efficiency is higher. Like the more energy is being transferred to higher trophic level than in high productive sites. That's what Jan Hatton showed.
Right.
So it's not like, but anyway, it's not important. Like
It's important, yeah.
But still, it's proportional. No, it's still not exactly proportional, but it is still positively related, which is right.
Okay, but yeah.
Right, because yes, it's not proportional, and that's interesting because this, but I think in this case it does not matter because he does not test the exact quantitative scaling relationships. That would have matter if you tested real scaling relationships. But these are just the links.
Well,
basically, this is about correlation, so it should be sufficient, no?
Yeah, I would have to think more about it.
Because still higher productivity means more resources, and that's basically
what we want
what we need. We do not need exactly how much resources it is.
Yeah, but if the strength of the link, for example, between temperature and productivity depended on the temperature, then it becomes harder to estimate.
Yeah.
If the parameters are like function of the.
Yes.
Yeah, both temperatures.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I should have put the explanations of how I extract these predictors, but now I'm going to briefly explain how I did that. So to represent the to quantify speciation rates, I took the phylogenies, the same ones that I used to select place based on the Laplacian spectrum, and then using traditional macroevolutionary approaches, in this case DR, I estimate tip speciation rates or per species speciation rates, which basically indicates how fast or slowly species are speciating across the phylogeny. And once we have the information for deep tip, and we also know where each species occurs along the grid cells, we can average the speciation rates based on the co-occurring species, and then also create this spatial variation in speciation rates as was done for species richness. As a proxy for time for species accumulation, we use NPD. So basically, again, we took into account the phylogeny and where these species occur across the grid cells, and then we calculate the mean pairwise phylogenetic distance among those species which were co-occurring in a particular grid cell. So this could be used as a proxy for time, as higher NPD could reflect longer branches or a community which is older and vice versa. To represent temperature, precipitation, and productivity, I use global climate database, and for productivity, I use net primary productivity, or simply plant biomass after subtracting by respiration, or the requirements for its own growth.
Plant biomass production.
What did they say?
No. You said plant biomass, but it's plant biomass production.
Plant biomass production. Yes. Sorry. Okay, so far I've guided you through how I select clades based on the Laplacian approach, how I map species richness pattern, the idea of using path analysis to try to disentangle these different effects. It's important to keep in mind that I apply this path model to explain the species richness of each clade. It's gonna make sense in the next slides, but I apply these for each clade. Okay, so what did we discover using this approach? So here, just a quick overview of the select clades. So the Laplacian approach retrieved 129 clades, of which 72 appear in warm periods, 57 in cool periods, 51 are endothermics, and 68 are ectothermics. And here in this figure, we can see how these clades vary in terms of species number on the y-axis and clade age on the x-axis. And we can see here that there are some clades which are older and have fewer species, whereas other clades are much younger but have a higher number of species. So the results that I'm going to show are based on these clades that were selected.
Well, by the way, this is interesting that for some people this was kind of strange. That it's like the clade age and clade species richness is negatively correlated, right? That's
actually, if we remove these, we kind of could have like something close to a positive, but for me, it still makes sense in the real world. We have like some clades which are older and have only 1 or 2 species, whereas others are quite young and have accumulated a large number. But yeah, some people found
no, but actually the reason is pretty straightforward, and like I think that it is not completely intuitive, but it's straightforward that old clades which are at the same time 2 species rich simply have so many different like ways of diversification that they were classified into different classes of this Laplacian spectra. Basically, it's a not artifact, but it's product of the method which kind of classify clades like be as homogeneous as possible. And these clades which are big and at the same time old are not homogeneous simply. For example, all mammals.
Okay, also the geographic area or the area occupied by these clades were equally diverse. So here we have density plots showing the range size or the area size of each clade divided between among the different groups. Here we can see like the smallest, the distribution of the smallest clade, whereas other clades have much wider and widespread distribution. Just to showcase how they vary also in terms of range size. Okay, in this part of the presentation, I'm gonna show you the results from the path models. So I will start by showing only the direct effects, only those arrows heading directly to species richness, as you can see here. What's important to have in mind here is that the dots, they indicate the mean standardized effect, and the intervals are 95% confidence intervals calculated across all the clades. So what we can say about this? So we found that there are some consistent direct effects regardless of clade physiology or climate or origin. So here in the first panel, we have these effects separated by ectotherms in green, endotherms in purple, warm in red, and cool in blue. So basically, if we compare these effects among these characteristics, there's no like much difference among them. However, when it comes to explain the importance of these variables, we can say that we found that productivity had the strongest effect on species richness, and also it's important to mention that the confidence intervals were narrow, so this could indicate there's less variability, less uncertainty on the true effects of productivity.
Isn't this a bit strange that the coefficient with the speciation rate is like negative?
Yeah, I will get that. And then yeah. Good question, good point, yeah. But then here, regarding productivity, it indicates that more productive environments have a higher number of species.
But for example, what is, actually this like would be surprising, but it has been already shown previously. So this is kind of counterintuitive pattern, which has been described by several papers. So for us, it was not that surprising because it was known from the literature. But for example, what is really surprising to me here is this basically non-significant effect of temperature for ectotherms, which is something I would expect. Actually, the temperature seems to have the here stronger effect for endotherms.
Yeah,
which is for me more surprising than the speciation rate, simply because I knew about it already.
Yeah, so
it also seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. And I'm gonna discuss this as well. But then precipitation also had some important effects. But in terms of speciation and time, they also had some influence, albeit they were weaker than productivity.
So sorry, can I go back to Honza's question? Because is it the effect negative because of density dependence, which would be the reverse causality, that higher species richness would mean like lower speciation?
Perfect. And then the next slides, I'm gonna kind of trying to wrap up everything, and then it revolves around what you said. Good, great. But then here again, speciation is negatively. So species poor regions are speciating faster. We also found that time had some positive effects, but the strongest effects were observed in clades that appear in cool periods. And what's interesting here is that these clades, they are much younger. They appeared around 30 million years ago onwards. So it's interesting because it might show that time plays a role, and they might not have yet reached equilibrium. And
the problem is that time, we do not know whether this variable kind of encompasses really time. It's the most problematic assumption that this mean phylogenetic distance kind of refers to, of course, you can imagine that the communities which consist of really old separated lineages are somehow older, but it is actually quite problematic assumption.
There could be some residual artifact, but it's interesting that for younger clades, these effects are, despite of these problems, still stronger. And also, as David mentioned, which is counterintuitive, temperature had weak effects in general, and for ectotherms and clades that appear in cool periods, these effects are not significant, and then it kind of do not support the metabolic theory predictions that the temperature should be stronger for ectotherms. Yes.
Is it because temperature is probably correlated with productivity, and the models somehow filter out the correlated variable?
No, basically, I mean, of course, they are at some extent they are correlated, but there's some productivity measures that you can extract. They are based or calculated based on temperature and precipitation, and then for this variable, it's like extremely highly correlated with productivity with temperature. But then I used new database from NASA where it's less dependent from temperature and precipitation.
What is it called?
This gross primary modis A2, something like this.
Gross.
No, I don't recall exactly the term, but it's from this MODIS satellite. And then they argued that it's less because some stuff, I guess, some years ago we couldn't find such more accurate measurement, and they use temperature and precipitation to kind of extrapolate what could be the productivity, and then for these metrics, it would be highly correlated with temperature and precipitation. So I avoid this kind to, of course, not include high variables which are highly correlated into the.
It's not used in the model.
No, to calculate productivity.
Yeah.
I can't say that, but at some extent, I guess so, but not as the major thing to estimate.
Doesn't it anybody still suffer a lot from collinearity problems?
You mean
okay, I see for independent arrows, but in the.
Yeah, I checked this correlation plot, and then the only case where the correlation was around 0.6 was between precipitation temperature, I don't remember, precipitation productivity. All of the other
so was the temperature related to productivity or not? You are still
I don't remember exactly, but they were not extremely high.
Right.
At some extent, of course, they should of course be, but I guess it's not in a such level which could somehow impact. And even there are some discussions that PF models, they are less sensitive to these multi-collinearity, but I don't like that much, and then I try to select to avoid variables which are highly.
Have you tried to run the model without the productivity? My hypothesis would be that then the temperature effect would be much stronger.
No, we don't find, because even
you didn't try.
No, because it doesn't make much sense in this theoretical reason.
Anyway, I think that really even the correlation showed that the productivity here, this measure of productivity is mostly related to precipitation, as far as I remember.
Yes, I'm gonna show you later, and then I'm gonna show you. Okay, so
basically this effect of temperature.
I can show
you use a measure of productivity which is relatively independent of temperature, I guess.
Exactly.
So it is. I don't think this is the issue, and temperature really turned out not to be that important. Even here, it is well visible, right? The temperature effect is much.
But how it could not be important if you compare Arctic regions with tropics? Then the temperature is clearly super important, right?
No, but I guess productivity doesn't necessarily.
Isn't the temperature also correlated with precipitation?
No. Between them, no. I would say that if there's a higher chance to be correlated would be among precipitation and productivity. But in this case, it was I would say moderate. But when I use these metrics that they calculate productivity based on temperature precipitation, the correlation was 90.95, so highly correlated.
So if you use models, well, I don't know whether they have some new product, but it's the models NPP measure. It's the measurement of biomass.
Yes.
But it's so there is still temperature and water vapor deficit as another variable, which are
somehow. I guess you cannot get rid of.
Temperature is used to calculate the respiration, so it's primary productivity minus the effect of respiration, which is believed to be temperature dependent. So it is somehow there.
So, yes, maybe.
But it can be even the effect can be relatively negative if it calculates respiration, which is removal of the.
But I believe it is there also somehow in the
I guess so. No, but as far as I remember the data, it was critically that temperature and productivity is not that strongly related. And temperature and precipitation is actually, you know, there is this classical climatic diagram. Basically, if there is some correlation there, then it is negative.
Yeah.
There is very high precipitation in high latitudes, you know.
There's some triangular shape regarding this too.
But how can temperature not be important with productivity? This is the main reason between tropics and the temperate now regions.
Not necessarily, because I guess we have like higher temperatures, let's say in desert, and then it doesn't translate necessarily into higher.
Yeah. So I would say it's like combination of
it's
of
much more
temperature
complex.
and water, but I think both are
Yeah,
important.
I agree. But you said that if you remove productivity, then the effect of temperature has to be positive.
I see.
It's like as you said, like the evapotranspiration is also like product of temperature and water
flow.
But the problem is that high temperature is also in deserts, right? So it's like
I guess if you remove productivity, then the effect of desert would be outweighed by in temperature.
There was this famous article from Hawkins 2003, and he was like basically saying that in the tropics or somewhere I don't know south from Mediterranean, the water is more important factor, and north of like Coral region and the rest of the temperature is the limiting factor. So
that's what we have shown recently.
Sorry?
That's what we have shown recently for all taxa.
I would say it's not so straightforward, because then there are mountains in the tropics where
You still have
I'd like to ask about the effect of time. So, is it hypothetically possible that areas with like high temperature, low precipitation, low productivity now can also have high temperature and so on, like thousands of years ago? So could everything hypothetically be explained by time? Because like conditions that are favorable now could be before, so therefore they had like more species earlier, therefore they had more time to.
Also, like more stable regions, they are warmer and they are older, let's say, and it's all, of course, all connected. But then I would say that this approach would select like these, what is explained maybe separately for each direction. But there was also some discussions why we did not include some, let's say, effects of temperature indirectly via time. But then when you go to the literature, the expectations are not so clear. And then one of the reasons to use path models is that you have to have some clear hypothesis to like justify each link. And then we drop these the effects via time. But I agree that somehow it's connected temperature with time would be potentially.
Well, if it was really tightly connected, you could basically would not be able to distinguish these things, I guess.
But I guess like you could like run an analysis, like hypothetical analysis. What if all the diversity is only because of time? Like what would it mean, right?
Yeah, but only if you use time, it's the overall effects were quite weak.
But it could be the way how we measure.
The way, but
sure.
I guess it comes mostly from the way we are measuring. Yeah. Okay, so going further now, I'm gonna show the indirect effects. Now, first the effects via speciation rates, and by temperature and productivity here, I mean these effects going through speciation rates. So as you can see here, the effects mediated through speciation are quite weak, and particularly for ectotherms, temperature doesn't go through speciation rates, which also do not support the metabolic predictions. And here maybe we can see that the indirect effects of precipitation mediated through productivity, they were, I would say, at some extent strong. And then I guess I don't have maybe the next slide. So here,
but show it again.
no, because
You know, so basically it says that the
temperature via productivity is
Yeah.
not related at all. I mean,
Yeah.
it's completely weak. But then there's this mediation here that there's
so basically this goes back to the discussion we had, right?
yes,
Because if the temperature effect, like if the productivity effect was just due to temperature, it would say
appear strongly,
yeah.
strongly here. Yeah, yeah.
Could it be because the temperature is limiting factor in the north, or like closer to the poles where you have like much less species or clades, so that the clades from tropics have much more weight in the model, so then you will see this pattern.
I don't
No.
If you do it just on the sample where you would have the same amount of species from the temperate and from the
It's also
tropics.
tricky how to separate if a clade is like temperate or because it has like both like latitudinal and longitudinal.
But I don't think this
variation.
would, the weight is the same. Basically, these are the numbers of species. So if it is one species, it has the same weight as 20 species.
I mean that there are less species in the temperate, so they would show like weaker effects in the model than if you have like.
No, but if there's less, we should still see a strong effect because it
Well,
defines the
if
longitudinal.
If there are less plates, then it's what Tomasz.
Yeah, because
If there are more plates in the tropics and less plates in the
Yeah,
temperate,
yeah.
It could out.
weight.
It could out.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
Well, something problem, like, I mean, I think like hypothetically there could be a problem with something like Bergson's paradox, which is the thing that like you have a lot of species, like it's a classical paradox where like, I don't know, like there's some like fake negative correlation between like you kind of like you select on two variables, like I don't know, someone dates people who are above some combination of good looking plus nice or something.
It could be like a trade-off.
And what you observe is like in the subset, like even if the things are normally positively correlated, like because you select for a subset where they are like kind of above some threshold, like you see a negative correlation that is kind of an artifact of the thing. So I can imagine something like that happening here because like you are kind of selecting for the places are sort of selected on having both temperature and humidity or something.
Yes. Yeah. It's tricky. But also it's because I did this for like over 100 plates, so it's not so straightforward to track how all of them vary in terms of where if it's appearing only in temperate or tropical, but could be some like reasoning behind this.
So you're really saying that most clades are tropical because there are more species in the tropics. So these patterns say more about the tropical trends.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why temperature. That's possible actually.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that's okay, right? Because we are exploring, like the situation across clades, and since most of them are tropical,
that's the reality.
That's the reality, right?
That's real.
So that few non-tropical clades are not that important because there are only few of them. Yeah, but it may be that out of the tropic it can be different.
So here is just a sum up of the most plausible scenario we found across most of the clades. Productivity emerged as the dominant direct effect. Also, precipitation had some importance via the effects on productivity. And here we have discussed that temperature had some weak effects, and basically these effects through mediators, either speciation or productivity, were not important. Also, time had some influence, but then it brings up many other discussions that could be some artifactual residual artifact of the way we are measuring this. And you also comment on this negative effect, which it's counterintuitive in terms that classical theory, they suggest that more biodiverse places, they are speciating faster. But then it's not this result that we found is not new at all. There's a recent wave of studies showing that there's actually an inverse latitudinal diversity gradient in terms of speciation rates. So basically speciation rates are higher towards the temperate regions. And
actually
then
towards the polar regions, that's even like.
So here we have like species, it's for marine fishes. We have like species richness pattern. So we have like the Indo-Pacific high richness. And then here we have the speciation rate. So we can see it's even towards the poles. And then so these kind of findings are not new at all. But when it comes to explain why this occurs, it's not so simple, and then it revolves around what Tomasz said before. So basically, coming back to the four scenarios that initially we have discussed. So the lack of a positive and strong effect of speciation rates on species richness, and also the lack of indirect effects mediated through speciation rates led us to reject these two scenarios here. Also, we can reject this scenario because we did not find a strong effect of time. There were some effects, but these they were general weaker, so it led us to suggest that dynamic equilibrium through like this stable persistence was the most plausible explanation. And now going a bit deeper into the interpretations based on these equilibrium dynamics. So what we are suggesting here to explain these findings is that productivity plays the key role in balancing out both speciation and extinction. And the idea here is that difference in productivity levels influence the how steep the extinction curves in red are. So basically, low productive environment, let's say temperate regions, they have fewer resources to sustain larger populations. So the extinction, so it could result in higher extinction levels. In contrast, high productive environment, let's say using this comparison, the tropics. So we have more resource that can sustain larger populations and therefore decrease the extinction rates. What also we have to imply in this explanation is what Tomasz said. So basically, speciation rates here highlighted in blue could be diversity dependent, meaning that speciation rates is just a consequence of the number of species in a given area. So let's say a region with more species could decrease the probability of speciation, and then it could explain this negative effect that our study and many others have found. So wrapping up here, the idea is that productivity shapes how like there's this turnover or this like how extinction and speciation behaves.
So the turnover is the keyword, right?
Yes.
I should simply the idea is that low species richness is associated with higher species turnover, so higher extinction rate and consequently higher speciation rate, and that leads to this positive relationship between species richness and speciation rate.
Negative.
Negative, yeah, right. Because
so the idea, okay, so like to get them into the picture, the idea is like in the like low productivity regions, like the species go off extinct, by which they kind of like empty some like evolutionary niche and like something else like
Yes, perfect.
Have you also explored missing links in the
no,
because some of the models can
Yes.
give you whether there is, I was just wondering whether
No, it's
there
a
would be link
good
between
question.
productivity and time or not, like.
Yeah, no,
It's kind of
as I mentioned,
fascinating.
there's some studies they were like using this how temperature productivity affects time, but then we also discussed that explanations to like to justify this link was a bit like
Do you think
flat.
I was just like thinking that some
Yeah.
that in the model you can explore
Mhm.
whether you are not missing anything.
Exactly. That's a good point actually, but also have to keep in mind that if I including more links, the model becomes more.
Just like to test.
No. She meant just the study.
I like it missing.
Yeah. It's basically an
Something
indicator.
unexplained.
Yeah. It's just an
But then,
indication.
yeah, it's a bit also tricky because we have like we did this for over 100 plates, so these missing link potential links could also like differ based on which particular.
Basically,
plate.
it would be pretty difficult to interpret.
Yeah.
You know, if there were some
Yeah.
missing link in some of these models out of these
Yeah.
200 something, and sometimes
But
not, right?
definitely, yeah.
So what to do with such an information, I cannot imagine. Really.
No, but definitely that could be maybe it's up to discussions. Maybe that other links would also be important. But okay, so what we are showing is that our results they are in line with this equilibrium dynamics scenario, and this actually is much more developed now. Make like a merchandise. A recent paper that Jordan and David published recently, like bring more in depth explorations on how equilibrium theory of biodiversity dynamics could shape biodiversity patterns across the scale. And the takeaway message here is that the species richness pattern across the clades we tested are mostly driven by equilibrium dynamics, with productivity being the most important predictor of this equilibrium, mainly by balancing out the turnover, the balance between speciation and extinction. And that's it from my side. Yeah.
Can you please go a few slides back where you have the results? This one.
Oh, sorry. This one. Okay.
So I'm trying to understand the link between the two diagrams. So when you study richness, you study equilibrium richness, right? Which is so the equilibrium is the intersect of speciation and extinction, and you're basically saying that the speciation is constant, right? So it's unimportant.
No.
No,
No, not constant. I mean, like it doesn't shift, right?
It doesn't shift. Okay.
And so
it shifts only like speciation rate only changes the species richness, but not yeah.
And so the variables that you have over there, temperature, precipitation, productivity, they act through either speciation or extinction, and you're saying that productivity operates through extinction, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but you didn't find what affects speciation, right? So the variables that you have there, they do not affect speciation. They all act through the extinction. Is that
that's the interpretation.
Yeah.
That
Perfect.
It's hard to say. Maybe there is some effect of on speciation, but we simply did not detect it.
Okay.
So it's true that my general feeling about these like patterns, but not only this study but other, is that extinction is really the driving force for diversity patterns. But it's hard to kind of prove it because we never have direct data on extinction, right? So it's really like indirect evidence, which is kind of strong in terms of there are multiple lines of indirect evidence that extinction plays a role. But basically, we do not have any way how to prove it like directly because extinction is. We do not have any data, right? Because if something went extinct, we do not have it.
We can assume that the species richness now is equilibrium species richness, right?
Not necessarily, but close to equilibrium.
Oh yeah, but
And
it's not right because then like it can be in equilibrium somewhere and somewhere not.
Yeah, yeah.
For instance, in a boreal region, temperate region.
Ah, okay. Yeah, you mean the kind of this scenario could deviate in some clades? It could.
No, like the points are the where the graph intersects is equilibrium diversity. But what if like I don't know, half of no, not clay. Well, you have clays and not clays, but so yeah. But what if some clay diversity is not equilibrium diversity?
No.
It's pretty possible, I guess. It's like
So one way how we approach this in economics, so there are different like ways how this could be approached, but one way is that you can distinguish between like long run and short run equilibria. So if you're like out of the long run equilibrium, you can still define the curves that determine the short run equilibrium. And so basically the idea is that in the short run, some of the factors are constant, so you just assume they're constant, and then you find the short run equilibrium. But then in the long run, everything is variable, and then you find the long run equilibrium. So you can basically use equilibrium analysis for everything. If something changes like all the time, prices, you can still say these are like series of like short run equilibrium. That
and do you are you able to encompass both the equilibria in one model?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So for example, in macroeconomics we have like short run equilibrium could be because people's expectations are wrong. Okay, so we are in the short run equilibrium, but everyone's optimizing with wrong expectations, let's say about inflation. But eventually people learn that they had wrong information, so eventually it converges to the long run equilibrium. So it could be in one model. So that's why I also asked about the diagrams, because I thought the bottom diagrams could be like long run kind of perspective, where you would have like multiple short run equilibria approaching the long run equilibrium. So, but I don't know. It's one of the methods how this could be approached.
But it's hard to talk about speciation, right, and short run.
Yeah, that's true.
But short run basically means that some of the variables are fixed. So I don't know what that would mean in this context, right? So
you mean like fixed?
Fixed means like
fixed.
They don't change, right?
I see. Yeah.
I don't know what that would be in this case. So.
Translate into this.
Yeah, the thing is that the equilibria definitely depend on scale. So that's kind of nice view. But it would be really interesting for me to know how to encompass both these scales into one model, because for me it's really hard to imagine.
Well, you could use some continuous model that like accumulation curve of species based on time, right? For example, after the KPG event where the dinosaurs extinct, there suddenly a lot of niche were free, right? So there was like radiation of birds. So if you had some data from this period, how species accumulated over time, you could see how the curve is like accumulating to like approaching the equilibrium or something, and then you would have the information about this time scale, how fast it will fill.
No, but I did not speak about empirical models. We often do not have data anyway, but I even about like conceptual models, I was not sure how to.
Yeah, so maybe if there's time, we can talk about it.
It's nice. There's some like
because it is pretty clear that there are different scales of these equilibrium processes. So equilibrium is always like related to some particular scale. It is really and of course even like the movement around the equilibrium can be conceptualized like really variation, really like fluctuation around the equilibrium, or some change of some small scale equilibria, right? This is like matter of like how you conceptualize it. But I really was not thinking at all about the possibility to like conceptualize but two types of equilibria in one model.
But isn't it like the logistic growth model, like just not that there is some different equilibria like short term and long term, but there is like just one equilibrium, and you just change the rate of.
Around this.
Yeah, but it's one equilibrium there.
Yeah, but it will kind of fulfill this time scale. I don't know how to say this. So
Sure,
it will show how the species accumulate over time.
No, but I do not have problem with like historical development and that you can like think about some like delays and lags, you know, in development and so on. I'm just thinking now about the really conceptual problem with two equilibria. Conceptually, it's not problematic to model movement in state space, which can be pretty long and so on towards some equilibria. That's not a problem.
Yeah, but maybe my point is that maybe we don't need multiple equilibria to satisfy the how to look at the role of time. We can just use
of course, that's the way how I was thinking about it. But what Marek says, it's really something else.
Okay.
Okay. No other questions?
Yeah, thank you for your.
Okay. Again.